Happy Monday. How's it going, Matt? It
It's going well. How was your weekend, Joe?
was a lot of fun. Yeah, Salt Lake City finally. Well, last week we had the giant blizzard, which you got to see when you were here. I
Yep.
think that was one of the biggest snowstorms I think of all year. And then now it's 70. So I guess welcome to the Mountain West. So
What day is maybe it was Thursday? Yeah, I think Thursday in New York it was like 75 degrees. It got up to 75 degrees. It's completely insane.
it's
Like,
bananas.
yeah, it's way too
Well, you
warm
guys
for.
didn't have much of a winter in the East Coast, right?
No,
So
no, really didn't. No, especially out by the
yeah,
coast
Yeah,
proper. Yeah,
uh, I don't know.
yeah.
Knowing Utah too, it's basically there's going to be like basically a couple days of spring, then we just hop right into summer. So it's should be pretty awesome.
Unless you get like a
But
late April, a couple inches of snow, which could also happen. So who knows?
well, I'll tell you, one of the biggest snowstorms I ever saw was it was on May 1st. I think it was like 1999 or something like that. I was driving to Wyoming, and I think the town I was going to, we got close to 5 feet of snow or maybe more. So that could happen too. You never know.
That
I've
would
also
fit.
seen it snow in the summer. So
Yeah.
I don't know, weird stuff happens. But anyway, yeah, fun times. But yeah, it's just the two of us this time. It's a rare treat or punishment for the audience, depending how you want to look at it.
We'll see
Andreas
who
Welsh
shows up.
was supposed to see who shows up. Yeah, Andreas was supposed to show up, but he got pulled into a last minute meeting that he couldn't get out of. So here we are.
We'll have him
But
on in a bit. We're still looking forward to it when he can make it
yeah,
to the show. So yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be great. So. But yeah. Anyway, it's good to see everybody here. We're actually getting quite a few guests. So that's a good sign. But yeah, I think we just want to make this kind of kind of a random grab bag of topics.
Yeah.
People tend to like this kind of format too. So for whatever it's worth, I think people do like the Joe and Matt show when we're together. So let's just give the audience let's give them what they want.
It's
So.
kind of funny. Like we almost deliberately underprepare because we're always thinking about this stuff anyway. And so, like, I spent the weekend reading a book on data catalogs by Oli Banyu about enterprise data catalogs, which was pretty great. So I definitely recommend that to anyone who's interested in data.
Oh yeah, that's a good book.
It
I
is.
read half of it. I didn't read the whole thing, but it was a really nice book actually. And my monitor's like freaking out here.
Oh,
Real quick, so I'm
okay.
just gonna
I think
unplug
the
it.
really interesting thing to me, and we had Oli on a while ago, and maybe we'll have him on again sometime, is that it's not just like a description of the current state of technology. It's kind of a whole vision for enterprises of having the system where you can search all your data assets very easily, almost like you would a library catalog or Google search. And then he goes beyond that and says, but why don't you, almost build your organization around search and just make everything searchable? At the end, when he's talking about the future, he talks about how every corporation has these like internal, intranet landing pages, and they're uniformly terrible, and they're built on some like old Microsoft product. And like, instead of doing that, why not have a search engine that just lets you find everything that you need to find in the company, people, processes, technology,
Mm,
the whole nine yards. So yeah.
yeah. I think it's interesting. I was actually talking with a friend of mine. He works at Elation, which is a data
Yeah.
catalog company, or
Yeah.
however they describe themselves. But what was really interesting is I think there's a new opportunity for stuff like ChatGPT too to
Yep.
comb your
Yeah.
data catalog and get metadata about your business. Because if you try and apply a large language model to a database, for example, the columns might be very poorly named. It might not get the right context, but a catalog actually provides a perfect medium for searchability and training. So that was interesting. 'Cause I think it's kind of the holy grail, at least in our nerdy circle, is to have large language models that are capable of understanding your business, and be able to regurgitate back interesting points about your business, help drive your business, and so forth. So that'll be very fascinating to watch.
Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely. What do you think about the problem of hallucination or lying, depending on whom you're asking? Like they're
I
they're
love
just.
hallucinating. It's awesome. So, but yeah, I think it's. I mean, it'll get better, right? I
Mhm.
mean, GPT-4 was all about just human reinforcement, and you can see this when you use ChatGPT too. It's you give the up or down thumbs, and that's meant to give it some training signals. So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I can only expect these things are going to get better. I don't expect they're going to get worse. And so I would just say the inevitability is these are going to be everywhere, and just count on it being everywhere. So
Yeah.
but everywhere also means like to what capacity is it just
Right.
spewing back information about a search, or does some emergent behavior happen where it ends up being able to help drive your business. At which point, I was having a conversation about this with Ryan Dolly last week on my podcast, which will be out this week. We were talking about basically, what happens when, AI is able to understand a lot of your business, and what does this do to, the analytics profession, for example, right? I think it's a very fascinating thought experiment that we're actually going to see playing out in real time.
Yeah.
So, no pun intended.
I tend to agree. And I think my opinion is what's going to happen is we're going to continue to see innovation in the large language model area, but then just innovations in the way they're used. And so specifically, I mean that if we look at the previous state of the art for generative AI, that was GANs, generative adversarial networks. And so we're actually using multiple models to generate things. You had one model that would generate things, and then the other model that would check to see if what you generated actually made any sense. So if you asked it to generate a cat, for example, the second model will check and say, is that actually a cat or not, and then give it feedback. And so I suspect that the big advances in the next generation of large language models will actually be something along those lines, like one model that generates and then another model maybe that can fact check. So to put this in historical context, think about IBM Watson when it was playing Jeopardy, and we get all these answers right by like crawling data and doing like basic language analysis to look for answers. And at this point, the large language models can't play Jeopardy because they make stuff up, right? But what if you combined a model like a GPT-4 with a model that's kind of like a Watson or something, where they compete with each other, and it says, no, go back and give me another answer because that answer is clearly wrong. I think it'll be really interesting to watch the pace of innovation the next couple of years, but I think it's going to move much faster maybe than we expect it to by combining.
This is how it becomes self-aware, Matt.
That's right. So. That's right. Which we're all waiting for, so we can be. It's
kind of funny though, right? Because I feel like we're, I mean, I've been reading about the singularity since I was a teenager in the '90s, and now it feels like we're sort of at the cusp of something. I have no idea what it is, but so you put it in context too of kind of what this means for data engineering, for example, or ML ops, or or software engineering or anything, right? It's I remember reading Andre Karpathy's article on Software 2.0 several years ago, where he predicted that code would be self-generating, and at the time I was like, yeah, this guy's like completely full of crap. But now I'm like, no, I mean, hold my beer. This is actually like a real thing. So this is really fascinating. I don't know. I do feel like we're just at the cusp of something that is none of us know what the hell is happening. I mean, if anyone tells you they could predict the future on what's going to be happening here, I would say like, be skeptical. So these things are advancing so damn fast right now that I don't know that anyone knows what's going to happen. So
yeah, completely agree. It's it makes it I think tech people tend not to think about these things in terms of public policy, but there is I think public policy is actually very important in this domain, to have like the right amount of regulation, not too much, not too little. And how we do that exactly is a very tricky problem, but I think we need to be committing a lot of brain cells to thinking about these issues.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I know that EU's, they're working on a GDPR2 right now, which a lot of that's AI regulation. We'll be talking about that in my podcast coming up. With somebody helping draft that, but stay tuned. I'm not going to give away too many details right now. And I know the U.S. is working AI legislation too, right? But the U.S. will probably do it in its own U.S. way, where some of it will make a lot of sense and some of it will make absolutely no sense because of just how the U.S. is set up to govern things, right? So I don't know. But the thing is, this is going to move ahead faster than legislation will. But when it becomes self-aware, it'll also know about the legislation, so it'll be really sneaky about it.
It's passing the bar exam.
No, I'm totally.
Right? Like,
yeah, no. I mean, they would probably say, "No, man, I'm totally harmless. Don't worry about me." Would you like me to make you a bar chart?
It's going to turn into a really shady lawyer, basically. Working in New Jersey somewhere in a dark office. In a strip mall.
Yeah. The days of like ambulance chasing AI is just going to be here pretty soon. They're going to have their sign of a bus. So, one call. That's all.
Oh, some of the attorney ads I've seen on the subway are just amazing.
Oh, in New York?
Oh, there was one that said like nothing eases the pain like a big fat payout. It was awesome. Yeah.
Oh, they would do that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, StreamYard's not letting us show the comments here, so I'll just read one of the comments out.
Okay.
Like, Chris Tab, what's up, Chris? Says Italy has recently banned Chat GPT. Yeah, Yeah, I saw a meme about that actually. I think somebody posted, they asked ChatGPT, "Is it okay to put pineapple on pizza?" And then somebody joked that that's the reason that Italy banned it. So it said, "Yes, you can put all kinds of toppings on it." It's like, what is this? Sacrilege? What are you doing here? So
That's interesting because one regulatory issue we have in the United States is that Congress really hasn't acted on data or AI. And so individual states are doing it. And the problem with that is that now I've lost count of how many separate state regulations we have now, but we might be up to like 15.
Utah has one. Utah
Yeah.
has
And
one.
from a compliance standpoint, that's a nightmare, right? If I'm a small startup with like 5 people and now I have to comply with like 20 different laws as opposed to, one for the EU and one for all of the US, it's just I agree that there's a need for innovation, but that really stymies businesses to have that many laws to comply with. And it actually favors big business because if I'm, a $10 billion company or $1 trillion company, that's not a big deal. If I'm a startup that just got funding, it's a big problem.
It's almost like it was meant to be. So,
Yeah.
yeah, for people who aren't in the States, the U.S., we have different ways of coming up with laws, right? So you got, city, local, state, county, federal, blah, 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 blah. And none of these really mix and match very well, I would say.
Yeah.
Federal kind of trumps things, except when you get to states like Utah or Texas that say, oh, well, that doesn't really apply to us because we're different. So, yeah, anyway, so I'll be very curious to see what this looks like. I mean, Utah just had some legislation that, what was it, teenagers or young kids now have to, register themselves to use social media. They have to provide like an ID or something like that. And I was like, this is, the intent's interesting. Enforceability will be a different topic in general. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It is what it is, man.
To watch. Yeah. I mean, arguably the tech industry has kind of run rampant over the last decade.
Oh, you don't say.
So this is understandable, but the way it's happening is a bit haphazard.
It wouldn't say that we actually brought this on ourselves.
No, not at all. No, it's not. It's not our fault.
It's not all everyone else's fault. Yeah.
Of
course. Somebody asked, okay, so let me go through the comments here and read them out because like I said, streamers are letting us post these. Sonny Rivera, what's up, Sonny? He says, will the history of data and analytics and decision making be defined by pre-LLM and post-LLM periods? What do you think about that?
That's interesting. I guess one thought I have is that the technology with respect to natural language processing, I view it more as a continuum because, again, you had IBM Watson. You had these various chatbots that you would interact with on your phone, like Siri, for example, which when that came out, that was kind of revolutionary, right? It was like, whoa.
That was way back in the day, like 2010 or something, I remember.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But like when that dropped, it was just felt completely revolutionary. And so I think we have all these like kind of gates we pass through where we see these big changes, but it is more of a gradual change. And I think there will be a moment when the LLMs get really good at maybe solving certain data problems. I don't think we're there just yet, but maybe it will be a year, maybe it will be 5 years.
I've been thinking a lot about this with respect to, setting up data stacks and also data modeling. Like I've been, it's something so I've been writing this book on data modeling and ChatGPT just threw me for a complete curve. So it's like, well, okay. I mean, this thing could probably figure out some nuance that maybe we can't either. So, I mean, they're kind of dumb now. They're getting better. I wouldn't think they're going to be dumb in about a year. I mean, GPT-4 is actually pretty dang good. So I don't know. I think, I could definitely, it reminds me a lot of kind of two other periods in tech history, right? So you had the web browser. I remember when that came out. I was, for the audience, I was like, I was the nerdy teenager and preteen back in the day that was on the internet like way before it was like really a thing. So, and I got to try out,
What year did you first see web?
91 or 2.
Yeah,
so I saw Mosaic
early.
94, right? So 94 is when Mosaic had come out.
That's about when I did.
Beta version. So and it was dope. You could download like really grainy, pictures and, it took like 2 hours to download or something like that. They're like a meg. But what I think it did is it opened your eyes. Okay, so like this is going to be a different way that we interact with the world. And then the other one was the iPhone, right? That ushered in a moment, and I feel like ChatGPT is the iPhone moment for today. And so who knows what'll happen, but I think it's pretty cool. I mean, everyone's talking about it, including us. So it's just I think it's a moment that AI hit mainstream. Finally. So, but AI's been around forever too. Like you
Yeah.
point out Siri and all these things. Like who was it? Ken G had a post on LinkedIn the other day. Like, when do you think, uh, AI is going to take over your life? And I was like, I think it already has. I mean, if you look at your
Yep.
phone, I mean,
Yep.
it's been doing that for ages. Like, try and be without your smartphone for more than about a day, and you'll probably be in a padded room.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and if you think about it, what's our definition of AI? Is AI where a machine is able to replace a human job function? For example, if you use that definition, then you can go back to like the 60s and 70s. So, for example, airlines back in the day had to have a bunch of people in a room who would manage reservations so they could make sure that they didn't overbook planes and seats. And so they would get together and they would have this big card catalog of people booked onto planes. And then when databases came out, that was a revolution for the airline industry
yeah.
because suddenly a lot of that could be automated and you could have it decentralized as well, right? Like you could have teams all over the country that could work on this stuff instead of having them all stuck in a room dealing with like a physical paper record of who had a reservation. And
Yep.
it's just continued since then. I mean, if we think about, I don't know, relational databases in the 1980s, that could be considered a form of AI in terms of its impact on the banking industry and insurance and all kinds of other business domains. And so I do really view it as a continuum with maybe certain big breakthroughs that happen along the way.
Mhm. Yeah, that's how technology's always worked. I mean,
Yeah.
in innovation, I'm reading Vaclav Smil's Invention and Innovation is his latest book, and that's really fascinating. It talks about innovations that happened and had a really
Yeah.
bad impact on the world, like leaded gasoline was one of them. It solved a lot of problems, but at the same time introduced a lot of very, very bad problems. So it kind of goes to the continuum of invention, and this is just sort of the how it's always been. But this has always been due to human ingenuity and creativity, and
Yeah.
so it'll be
Yeah.
very fascinating to see what happens when something other than us starts coming up with new ideas, and it's going to happen. I mean,
Right.
it's just the inevitability of how it is. But like I said, I've been looking forward to this day since I was a nerdy teenager reading cyberpunk novels and Ray Kurzweil's Singularity books, and so I'm prepared.
So you're going to be uploading your consciousness like tomorrow, just checking out. You might miss
it may or may
CrossFit
not
if
be.
you did that.
Yeah, it might be a CrossFit, but it may or may not happen that I get cryogenically frozen at some point. So we'll see. But anyway, yeah, it's just nice. It's fun to speculate on all this stuff. But like I said, it feels like we're just like living in real time through something that none of us can quite put our finger on. But it feels like this is definitely like a real time inflection point in humanity. So
Right.
and in the data field, right? So I'm very curious to see
agree.
what happens
Yeah.
over the next several years and technology in general, right? I
Yeah.
think that a lot of the workflows that we talk about, even data engineering, it's it's probably gonna change.
As it has,
So
right? I mean, we wrote a book on it, but frankly, we wrote a book because it had changed a lot since the Hadoop era, since the relational database era, since the emergence of data warehouses, and it's going to just keep right on changing, basically.
yeah, it will. It will.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of switching gears a bit. I mean, so we were at conferences recently. You were at Data Council. We were both in Switzerland at SKID.
Yep.
Shout out to Chris Tab and the elite crew for putting that on. That was
It's
fantastic.
fantastic. It was a great conference. It's
fun
only
time,
going to get
yeah.
bigger in the future, I think. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, and hopefully as an American edition in Salt Lake City. Hint, hint,
Yeah.
hint.
Yeah.
There's more ski resorts here, and it's a better place for
It's
conferences.
cheaper.
The Agile Manifesto was signed here too, so
That's
I mean,
right.
enough said, right? And
Was
I'm
that
having
at
PyCon
Snowbird?
here next week? Yeah, it was at Snowbird. Yep.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think up at the Cliff Lodge. Yeah. But yeah, conferences. They're back. They're bigger than ever. But Data Council, tell me about it. What was up with that?
It was really great. Just I got to give my talk where I was talking about the convergence of real-time and batch processing, and just had a lot of great conversations about where the data industry is going. It's become kind of known as an investor conference. In other words, it's like a lot of practitioners and founders and such, and people with ideas in the space, and then a lot of people who are interested in knowing where the data industry is going, so they can make investments or become involved with the companies. And my general vibe with the conference is that obviously the economy has changed a bit and venture capitalists are kind of reorienting themselves, but I kind of got the vibe that they're looking for new ways to invest in data. So maybe there's been something of a pullback since, a year ago, but also they're looking for like new companies and new ideas in the space.
Generative AI, maybe.
Among other things. Yeah. So a lot of interest
Yeah.
in like what I'll call next gen real time. In other words, like
Yeah.
how can we rethink real time systems to make them more accessible? and both to developers and to ops teams, to companies, not both, but all those different areas. How can we make them more accessible? Because real-time technology has been around for some time, but it's had a reputation for being somewhat difficult to manage, develop, everything else. What else? Like, I think there's a continued interest in better data engineering tools that make it easier maybe to work with tools like Python. That's a slow evolution that we've seen where we went from things like Scala Spark to more and more PySpark, but there's actually a lot of interest in Python again, which I'm sure we'll see at...
What do you mean more interest in Python? Did it ever go away?
It never really went away, but I think there was an attitude that Python is not a performant language, and so you shouldn't try to use it for data engineering. And I talked to a number of companies that are working on ways to streamline the movement from notebooks to production and to make Python a more accessible language for scaled data engineering that's more efficient. Various ways to compile Python, for example. PyScript is all the rage right now, so I'll be curious to hear more about that at PyCon as well.
Yeah, I need to nerd out on that one. I haven't played with it yet. Yeah, and PyCon's here next week for the audience. We're Salt Lake City, Matt's in New York, but Salt Lake City's cooler. We're having PyCon. You aren't.
And I'll be there. So
yeah, and he'll be there. Yeah, but so I'm very curious to see like what the conference track is and the presentations regarding Python performance.
Yeah.
I know the talk has eternally been about the gilectomy, so getting rid of the global interpreter lock on Python. There's numerous attempts to do that, but Python ain't bad either. But I mean, it's kind of like what do you need to do at the end of the day? So I know a lot of people are trying to move to Rust right now, and I think that's going to be a very fascinating move. Python, I know some Pythonistas that are all raving about Rust, but Python's kind of here to stay regardless. Jess Haberman says, "Ooh, PyScript rocks!" Yay, yeah. So does Jess. Jess rocks too. So yeah, I mean, but I mean, you can interoperate with both anyway, Rust and Python. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the problem, so one of the key strengths of Python is that you can just hook it into C code, right? So you can basically make it as fast as you want to by just plugging C code into it and making a call C code. The problem is that creates an integration headache and a portability headache. And so I think for a long time, the question has been like, how do you have that C code integration, but also support compilation on different platforms so the raw Python code itself can be fast? So I'll be curious to see what happens in that space. So just from looking at PyScript a bit, there's stuff happening there, certainly.
Yeah, PyScript. It's interesting. Wasm might be the other one.
Yeah, exactly.
Portability.
PyScript apparently uses.
Yep, exactly. So, yeah, that's the one I'm bullish about. Speaking of which, Mother Duck, shout out to them for the nice mug. So actually, they're going to be speaking at the Utah Data Engineering Meetup next week too. But I think Wasm's a really, something that fascinates me a lot. I think that's, definitely maybe a next evolution of portability and scalability too, right? So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I would say Mother Duck was probably more than any other company to talk at the Town at Data Council. I don't know if they.
Well, when Jordan shows up in a duck suit, I mean, like, come on.
There were certainly critiques of the duck suit that we saw online afterward. So we will.
Yeah, I like the duck suit though, and Jordan's a friend, so he's we're fans, but it's. But it's early days in this kind of stuff too. I feel like the approach that they're trying to take. I mean, it's interesting though because it's the approach that. So I did a meetup last year with Single Store, and they did a demo of Wasm and Single Store.
Yep.
This is before I think Jordan had taken off to start Mother Duck, and that was fascinating because the entire time I was like, "Holy crap!" Running a database in the browser to say the video game demo, and I was like, "This is insane!" Actually, you don't do network traversal, right? You just stats in the database in the browser, and it's like, okay. You got my attention. There's a lot of applications for this, and I think that's maybe in part what inspired the desire to maybe try out DuckDB in the browser, right? So, but I think it's cool. I think it's a cool idea. I'm excited about the potential of Wasm for a lot of things actually, because I was pinging Jamak telling her, I think her ultimate vision of data mesh, for example, of in the truest sense of decentralized data sharing amongst individuals, which is the other version that she probably doesn't talk about much, but it's like that could be accomplished by something like Wasm, for example. Because you already have a lot of the web interfaces built into the browser, so it makes actually the sharing of data quite seamless if you were to do it. So I don't know, lots of opportunity though.
Yeah. Well,
So
and we've talked about the pendulum swing of remote versus local processing, right? So historically, you go way
yeah,
back and you had mainframes, and then there were mini computers, which brought the computing a bit closer to home for people with lots of money, of course. And then PCs, okay, now all my computing is happening locally. And then the web happened, and all the computing got pushed remote again. And then it was really like the advent of mobile plus JavaScript compilers like Google V8 that created a
yeah, V8 was
hybridized
big.
approach. So in other words, remote backend, but local process, a lot of local processing. And I think that's what DuckDB is doing. It's like that next evolution, but now applied to analytics, not just to, basic web apps that run on your phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I'm yeah, curious to see where this all goes.
Yeah.
So, and ChatGPT, on WASA. I'm just kidding, but
Well, I mean, but there are.
it's actually probably a company there, actually. So.
Yeah. Well, because the thing is, ChatGPT to train it takes a lot of compute that you're going to run in the cloud, right? But there have been examples of running these models locally, like kind of a reduced version of the model on a local machine, not training it locally, but just running it so you can get responses.
Yeah, like Stable
without a
Diffusion runs on the
connection.
new M2s, for example,
Exactly.
locally. And I think there's like, I can't remember if it's Hugging Face or Stable Diffusion, but they have like a version, I think, on there's some sort of generative AI model that's available on what is it, Core ML or something like that on iPhone. So
Like Dolly, maybe, or something else.
I can't remember which one it
Okay.
is, man. It's
There's so many. Yeah.
all the
there's space.
hallucinations I have. Yeah, it's like
I told you not to plug an LLM into your brain. I told you this would end badly.
or an MLM. Which one?
Right. Yeah.
I'm in Utah, so
It's viral. Yeah.
could be the one. Yeah. That's interesting. What were some of the other, data counts that? What's some? Cause I kind of consider that to be, sort of the, it's where all the cool kids show up. I wasn't there. I was like, on my deathbed with some illness during that time, so I wasn't going anywhere. But yeah, what were some of the talk tracks? I mean, what was the talk? So the conference halls, for example, right? The hallway track. Like, what were some things people were talking about besides what we just talked about?
So there. Let's. I won't name these companies by name, but there's one really, really big vendor that used to call themselves a cloud data warehouse and now calls themselves a cloud data platform. And there's another company that now frames itself as a data lakehouse company. And so there was a lot of discussion about the competition between these two players. I think you probably know whom I'm talking about. So a lot of discussion around that. Yeah, definitely a lot of discussion about LLMs. Let's see, Makiko and I were talking quite a bit about, Makiko Basley, we're talking a lot about the difference between data ops and ML ops. And actually our conclusion was that there are differences, but like the area of overlap is pretty significant. And so we should be talking more about how data engineers and ML ops engineers can collaborate as opposed to compete with each other.
Oh, hey, that's a talk I'm giving in Germany in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Costas, he wrote an article recently on the ML ops community about how, like, what was it? I'm going to butcher it, but like 98% of ML ops is just data engineering.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Yeah. And that was our conclusion too. It's like, yeah, there, in the tech industry, you see a lot of reinventing the wheel. So everyone wants to come in, and it's like the old saw about like every generation discovers sex. And in some sense, every generation discovers data engineering. In fact, there's been a lot of like ceremony around, even in the Hadoop era, it's like, oh, everything here we're doing is new. And Bill Inman would argue to the contrary that a lot of stuff that they're doing is just kind of reinventing the wheel. So. Yeah.
Well, he helped invent the wheel. So
exactly. Yeah.
He knows what a wheel looks like.
Yeah. So there are new iterations each time, right? But I think each new generation should try to learn as much as possible from the previous generation. That's kind of an argument you're making in your data modeling book as well, I believe.
Well, there's a sense of reinventing the wheel, right? And again, it's the old trope. But I think it's the one thing we're really good at is reinventing wheels.
Yeah.
It's like we get paid to do that or something. So. Yeah, Senator Vera says add data modeling to the wheel. Fred Ladaro says everything old is new again. Yeah, these are both very true. Data modeling is one of these things where I feel like it definitely goes in a pendulum. Right now, I think we're on the end of the pendulum where I think people are. It's kind of a free for all.
Yes.
A lot of the established techniques, aren't as widely used or acknowledged. I think this is. I think this is empirically true too. I mean, just go and talk to any data team and ask them how they're data modeling. You will not get a consistent answer these days.
Right.
Chris says add observability. Yeah, that's also true.
Yep.
I mean, but yeah, so it's old's new, new's old. The approach I'm taking with my book though is and the approach I'm taking with data modeling is that I do feel like it's on life support right now. I will stand by that argument, and by that I mean that. just a lot of the widely used approaches, widely known approaches aren't as known or recognized now. So there is a lot of wheel reinvention,
Yeah.
for better or for worse, right? And so, and you're finding out data modeling by going to Slack groups or going on to, various forums, and then just kind of identifying, okay, so these people are doing this, therefore I got to do this. But what's really missing right now is the notion of, the kind of the higher level modeling aspects of conceptual and logical modeling we were talking about last week with Larry Burns, right? Shout out to Larry, one of those underrated people in the industry, I think. But
go read his books.
It feels like his books are good,
Yeah.
right? But I feel like it's more of the notion of modeling to accomplish cohesive and coherent business concepts.
Yes.
Right. That's what I'm getting at. Like physical modeling, there's a slew of different ways you could do that. There's going to be more ways you can do it. That's not my problem with it. My problem is now it's like there's just the notion of like coming up with, and agreeing on business definitions across the data lifecycle, concepts, processes, mapping these out, understanding how data flows, how processes flow. Like that's a lost art.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And if you look at a lot of the critiques of the modern data stack, they really come down to this issue, which is the tools are actually really great. Like a generation ago, people would have been just blown away to have such tools at their disposal. The problem is that they're so easy that we are reinventing or just not doing things, right? We just like throw it all in your database and don't worry about how it's modeled. And modeling has a lot of business value fundamentally. Like it can really improve the performance of your organization, cost efficiency, a lot of different things. And so I think the next iteration of the modern data stack is to actually apply processes to it and say, we need to think about what are the concepts in this data? What should the logical model be? And not get so hung up on the physical model, which is what's been happening recently.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's my whole point.
Yeah.
Right. Introduce you to a bunch of physical modeling techniques.
Right.
But also tell you, like, at the end of the day, it really does come back to the logical and conceptual modeling, which you just have to figure out. Like, what are those concepts that you're anchoring on? Like, that's a really big one. I'm reading this book right now. Ronald Ross was nice enough to send me a copy of his book, Business Rules. You should get it.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'll order it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's, he writes about rules, business rules. Very sexy topic. I'm kind of joking, but the thing is, this is like the necessary stuff, right? This is the hard stuff. But this is stuff, if you can get it right, things work. If you can't get it right, you have chaos. And I suspect a lot of the reason that we have, a lot of the kind of these tools that surround the modern data stack, whether it's quality, observability, and whatnot, I think you can trace it back to the root cause of that. If you're not thinking about your data up front when you're creating it, you're going to have problems. And this is what happens.
Yep. And one of the arguments we've made, and actually an argument I made at Skid about data modeling, is that right now what tends to happen is the data model in the application itself is created either completely haphazardly. I think that happens quite a bit. Or if it's coherent, it's created without any thought for analytics downstream. And I think increasingly, and this aligns pretty well with Zhamak's data mesh concept, we need to integrate analytics thinking into the design of an application from the get-go and also into the iteration of that schema over time. Especially with real-time, as we've discussed with folks like those from Materialize, for example, you don't really have time to change the data model when you stream, right? It's just not practical to like completely remodel the data, which is what happens with traditional enterprise ETL. And so you need to think about it as the data is produced so it can flow right into an analytics operational system from there.
Not just analytics, though, machine learning, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's completely. Yeah, unless you're using generative AI to analyze the data, which actually is happening now. So, as Brian Green, he has a really good point here, which I could show the comments. Thanks, StreamYard, for not letting us share comments. Yeah, he says if you don't use the data model, I don't know, man. Sometimes their stuff works, sometimes it doesn't. So, I'm taking a snipe. They're a good team. They help out with our problems, and we asked me. But Brian Green, he says if you don't use the data model to generate the applications and the data flows, you end up with a collection of tools you need to try to observe. That's just it. So I use the analogy of basically it's an EKG machine, right? So, you can set up heart monitors on you, which is great. You could also try and make it so you treat the reason why you need a heart monitor in the first place. So it's good to detect things, and you might detect things that just strangely happen that you don't know about. That's always how it is, right? But at the same time, I think a lot of the culprit is data is just hard to reconcile with. And why is it hard to reconcile? again, when it's created upstream, if downstream users and stakeholders aren't aware of it or aren't involved in that process in terms of defining, business concepts and so forth, have a stake in that, then it's like, what do you think is going to happen? Data teams right now are on the receiving end of everything. It's the old saying, shit flows downhill. Yeah. That's where data teams are. So.
Yeah. And I think analytics has been an important part of business processes since at least the 1980s. But I think gradually there's a shift in executive thinking to recognizing this fact and recognizing that we need to think about analytics throughout the process and also just
ML.
Yeah. Well, now in the contemporary world, ML as well.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's just a notion of thinking about things in the holistic life cycle of data, which is how it always should be, right? Because my beef right now with the data modeling techniques, when we're talking physical modeling is, and it's rightfully so, this is how it should be, but they're all very use case, very technology specific, right? So relational databases has relational modeling, data warehousing, depending on how you want to define it, it has its own techniques for modeling data there and so forth. And so, but these are very siloed ways of looking at the world, right?
Yeah.
So you have to think of it as a continuum.
Exactly. And there's so much ceremony, right? That's the other complaint. And that's kind of why in the big data era, people tended to reject data modeling out of hand because so many people were telling them that they were heretics and not doing things right, rather than saying, how do we figure out how to adapt our techniques to your technology?
Which became its own ceremony too, just like Burning Man's a ceremony for, for
burn it all
lack
down.
of rules and anarchy. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just, you guys just, you're worshiping different things, but at the end of the day, it's all ceremony, right? And the thing is, every data model, anytime you have data in a system, it's a model, right? You intentionally created that data in a way to conform to something. Therefore, it is a model. Whether it accurately represents reality or not is a different story. But a crappy data model is still a model.
Yeah.
Just like a crappy picture is still a picture. It's just it may not make any sense, but it's still a picture. So
it reminds me, you took that picture. I think that was in Paris, right? And someone had chalked on the sidewalk. It was an anarchy symbol, and then it said "salary for life." It was like totally self-contradictory, and that's kind of what a lot of this ceremony reminds me of, right? It's just like mashing together these concepts and getting very attached to them without thinking about bigger coherence. So.
Yeah, I'll show the audience here. So there's So in Paris right now. So I was in Paris. And it's an absolute junk show there right now because of all the protests. But there's a salary for life with an anarchy sign. So I'll just let the irony sink in on this one for a few seconds here. The government sucks, but as long as we pay
burn it all down, but salary for
burn it all down, but pay me money. Shout out to people. I think protesting is always a cool thing. I think so. I'm not going to dog on people. I think it's just it is what it is. But I did think it was kind of funny. So it was like, it's anarchy everywhere, but smash the state or something like that, but no, it won't happen. But yeah, it's interesting too. When you travel to places like Europe, it feels like, a lot of topics we talk about in the States, same topics people are talking about over there in different ways though. Right. I feel like Europe moves a lot slower than the US in business. So, which I think is a feature and a bug, just like the, move fast and break things in the US is also a feature and a bug here. It works until it doesn't. I think the US just has really high highs and very low lows. We don't have like sort of anything in the middle. So we're the land of extremes.
Yeah. Well, and as I said, I'm worried about the state of regulation in the United States because we don't have coherent national regulations. You posted a while ago about, what was it, the U.S. innovates and Europe regulates. And I think if we're not careful, we'll end up switching places without having coherent regulations here because every state will try to step in and do it instead, which actually could be far worse than the situation we have now.
Yeah. Well, the U.S. will, what, you think we're just going to keep regulating then? Or the EU is going to start innovating? Or?
Well, meaning if I'm a company and in the U.S. I have to deal with 30 separate privacy regulations versus in the EU I only have to worry about one. Like that's a far simpler situation for me to confront. So.
Oh, no. In the U.S. you got to deal with the EU too.
Oh, that's true. I guess my point is that eventually if we don't get that like state level regulation situation under control, then we could end up way overregulated in the United States.
For sure.
Innovation.
There's some company here in Salt Lake. I think it's 650 or something like that, but they deal with regulation and compliance, and it just seems like it's a patchwork of just stuff. Like the more regulations, I think, the better this company does. Because like, how are you going to make sense of it?
Yeah.
So, and you pick the most atrocious one and just level towards that one.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure who has that right now, if it's still CCPA,
Yeah.
California's law, or somebody else. But it's like, I think you just want to overweight on like who's the harshest
Yeah.
and just pick that one. And if
But
it's
then,
EU, then it's EU.
but
So
it's the fine print, right? Is there some weird like niche regulation that say Wyoming has that I either have to comply with or I have to stay out of Wyoming? Like that kind of thing gets to be
who
a real headache.
knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a headache, and it's also kind of the risk assessment too. Of like, what are they
Yeah.
going to do?
Exactly.
Right? Are they even
Yeah. Yeah.
go after you if there's some like
Or kick us
small
out or sue
company?
us. Like, yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's targeted at the big tech companies, though, right? I
Right.
don't think that's
Right.
any like secret. It's not targeted at like, the mom and pop shop. I mean, they might be
Yeah.
on the receiving end of some dumb
That's the
stuff
problem, right?
as regulation
Yeah.
happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because again, if
So
I'm a small startup, I just started and I have 5 people, could I still get sued by a random state where I didn't
in theory,
comply?
yeah, you
Yeah.
could.
Yep. So
Yeah.
and that would put me out of business. And so, yeah. It's
So our lawyer, I think, would just assess it like, what's the risk of something happening to you?
yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, because what's it? I was reading like, the average person commits like 2 to 3 felonies a day.
Really? Tell me
Yeah.
what felony did I commit today?
I don't know what felonies you want to commit today.
Yeah.
No, if you go Google it though, it's an interesting thing. It's actually a published stat. I need to dig into it, but I heard it on talk radio, so it must be true. But I was like, that's
Interesting.
fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
felonies, right? So
Yeah.
that was a very explicit thing. Like, you commit felonies every day. Most people do. I'm like, I don't know what that would be.
Yeah.
Try and be an upstanding citizen, but so
Well, in the U.S., we have this weird situation where there are a lot of laws on the books that aren't enforced, but aren't necessarily unconstitutional either, have never been like specifically contradicted. And so, in theory, someone could try to pursue you with one of these old laws vindictively or something.
kid was telling me about some weird Utah laws. I'm just going to show them to you because I think they're pretty funny. So there was something. Yeah, elephant hunting is strictly illegal here. What else? You can't sheep herd in Salt Lake, surprisingly enough. That's something you can get in trouble with.
Okay.
There was something about it playing a violin, though, which I thought was interesting. Anyway,
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
There were these old laws. I mean, they might not even be that old, but they were something about like you couldn't serve alcohol at a strip club. And so at one point, this was like over a decade ago, but there's Broovies, which is a movie theater that serves alcohol, right? And they're kind of like Alamo Drafthouse is the original out of Austin, from what I understand. But anyway, they were showing R-rated movies, and so like the prosecutor went after them for like supposedly serving alcohol at a strip club because they had these R-rated movies that had nudity in them or something. So.
Yeah, here it is. Okay, yeah, the average person is thought to commit at least 3 felonies a day. This is the yeah, it's from a Harvard professor estimating the number of felonies. Yeah, so it must be true, obviously. Yeah, Harvey Silvergate. So just go look that up. I'm not lying about this. So Jess says, "Oh, it sounds like a hallucination to me," but yeah, no, I'm telling you the truth here. So, yeah. So anyway, none of us are locked up yet. So
Not yet.
yeah, just don't. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's cool. So what other stuff is on your mind right now?
That's a good question. I think the economy is kind of on everyone's mind, right? Like it just feels like we're still in this weird period of uncertainty where there are strange signals like bank collapses, and yet we're still waiting to see with bated breath to see what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to see what that does too. I mean, it's interesting with startups. I mean, funding had just gone from like bad to worse right now, so that's fascinating to see. So I'm very curious to see how this impacts startups in particular,
right?
In the data and tech space specifically, right? So I think it's gonna cause businesses, I think, to maybe operate a lot better,
right?
I talked to some founders and they're like, it's gonna be hard to raise money, so I'm just gonna do it my own way, and I'm like, you go, that's cool. I think that you should, I mean. I think VCs are great, but they do have a very specific way of looking at the world, and it's not the only way to run a business. I mean, if I look out my window, well, there's no business here because there's a giant hill in front of me. But if I were to imagine looking out the window at all the businesses in my neighborhood, I don't think a lot of these are VC funded. I think a lot of these were, very traditional businesses, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think that that notion of having to hyperscale a business and all this stuff, I think it works until it obviously doesn't. And you're seeing right now what happens when the funding cycle dries up and your valuations cut at least in half, if not more. Now you're back to having to do weird stuff like make money and profits and I don't know. It's a strange idea, but
Well, and it's interesting. It really has shifted the founder mentality. So I've talked to multiple founders who have said, yeah, at this point, I'm looking to raise a seed round, but then I really don't want to raise any more money after that. I just want to run a profitable business because the money beyond the seed round comes with too many strings attached, basically, like this expectation of being a unicorn. So think about this. Think about, you go found a business tomorrow, and then within 5 years, your business is valued at $100 million. Like in most circles, that would be considered just astonishing success to do something like that. But in the venture capital world, if you don't hit $1 billion valuation, then it's considered a waste of money, which is kind of insane. And it creates a lot of unnatural, business acts, basically trying to reach this $1 billion or multi-billion dollar valuation.
yeah, I think you're just in a different world right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like treasuries are basically paying as much as stocks right now. Think about that.
Crazy. Well, and who knows? I mean, the market could go down. Any number of things could happen with it.
Could go down, could go up, probably will go down. I don't know. Yeah. So it's interesting. But yeah, I think it's cool talking to founders these days, though. And I think they're, kind of reassessing how they're going to run their businesses. And again, I think it's going to mean for different business models that aren't traditionally, what we saw the last 10 years. But the last 10 years aren't what we traditionally saw in business with low interest rates and, hyperscaling and stuff. I think this was an anomaly. And you're going to look back on this period and it's going to just be like, yeah, that was a very unique point in time, until interest rates lower and then you go back to kind of where you were. But again, we're not macroeconomists and stuff. I mean, I am reading actually the Statistical Consequences of Fat Tails by Nassim Taleb. You would like that book. That's like very nerdy and mathy.
I've got it. I should read all his books. So I've read a couple of them, and honestly, there are frankly things I disagree with sometimes, but he always has interesting points to make. He's a bit of a troll, but not necessarily in a bad way.
You don't say.
He's there to provoke people into changing their thinking. And I call him kind of a deconstructionist. In other words, he's more interested in deconstructing ideas as opposed to constructing systems. But I think we all kind of need that when we're assessing the way that society runs and things that maybe don't make so much sense.
But I think he's got a really good systems thinking mind, though, too.
Well, the anti-fragile thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's fascinating because it takes a look at mathematically, how do fat tail risks work, and that was a really good expedition because it's he talks a lot about it in his books, but at the same time, it's not he's like, oh yeah, you can use math, and I'm like, oh, why don't you show us how you would do that then?
Well, because if you follow him on Twitter, it's amazing the amount of math he posts on Twitter.
Oh, he's smart.
Yeah.
I mean, he's mathy. I don't know if that means you're smart, but I mean, he's good. He's also smart. I mean, it's good people like this exist, but who's the Nassim Taleb of the data world?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know off the top of my head. Do you have an opinion?
No.
I mean, I think he is, right? He's very into data as far as I know.
He is actually. I would say maybe he is. I was trying to think of somebody because it's I think there's a lot of people who have opinions and strongly voice them online. I don't think there's anyone who thinks on his level that's in our industry.
Right.
So, except maybe him. So,
Well, because it's kind of funny. I mean, to be honest, I think we as a herd, that the whole tech herd, are kind of simple-minded in our outlook in many ways. It's a lot of very simple-minded, smart people in some sense. We tend to have very specific, narrow goals and narrow ways of thinking. So that's how I see it, I guess.
But isn't that like any profession, though?
Maybe, but I think in principle, people more interested in philosophy or the bigger picture do try to take a broader view of things. And so I think if you're in tech and you've worked as an individual contributor, you tend to get very obsessed with narrow things. So for example, let's think about the programming language wars, functional versus object oriented, and how deep down the rabbit hole people go on these arguments. And it's just a very narrow slice of something that at the end of the day probably doesn't matter very much either for society or even the evolution of technology.
Don't tell them that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
right. But no, it's as you say, the arguments are so vicious because the
stakes are so low.
Small.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, because you see people arguing over programming languages. Some people absolutely hate Python, which I can understand. There are some annoyances, but they hate it because it doesn't correspond to some very pure paradigm like static typing or functional programming.
Yeah.
And it's well, I just want to get stuff done. I mean, and if you look at the languages that are built around a very pure paradigm, they tend to not get used that much. So.
Oh, no, I have a good example. I used to work with somebody who was a functional programming purist.
Right.
And he said, too, he's like, businesses would succeed if they adopted functional programming. And I'm like, that's probably the most clueless statement I think I've ever
Right.
heard
Right.
from somebody who's supposedly smart. Like if you've gone and run a business, I don't think functional programming has anything to do with your success or failure, one iota.
Right.
It has to do with, a lot of other things, but certainly
Yeah.
not that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, as people have pointed out, you can't build a real system that's purely functional, right? Like as soon as you need to like access a database or do some other, you get side effects all over the place. And so, like I think the functional paradigm is useful, but it's not usable in an absolutely pure way in a real system.
Don't tell them that.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, you're gonna get a lot of hate mail for
I'll
that
have to
one.
check the state of Haskell because for a while I know Facebook was using Haskell heavily for certain types of distributed systems, but I don't know what's going on with it now.
It's a cool language.
It is
I
cool
went through,
language,
I
yeah.
went through a phase where I was nerding out on Haskell for a
Yeah,
while, and
yeah.
it was like, then I was like, okay, this is good, I think, to learn functional paradigms, but at the same time, like, no way am I ever going to use this in production.
Yeah.
Say I get successful and I have to hire somebody, like, I can say, like, oh, go use Haskell because that's what I use. I guess is one company I worked at. It was the functional programming shop. It was also a machine learning company, and they decided they were going to build something in like F# for some reason.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, seriously, like, where are you going to find F# programmers in this area?
Exactly.
Do you realize like the learning curve for that? You got to learn functional, and then you got to learn this language on top of everything else. And then your own idiosyncratic way of like doing functional at this team. It was kind of bananas. So.
Well, I knew one company, and they started out as a Python shop, and then their like head developer, who was one of the first hires, decided that the next step was to go to Go. It's like I've looked at it in terms of scaling up our distributed system. Go is a great language for managing distributed systems processes, so he started switching over to that. And then he left to take another job, and then this new team came in. And they're like, oh, no, we need to rewrite everything in Clojure. Like Clojure is this JVM-based, kind of functional language.
Who farted?
It's like, Clojure is cool, but I wouldn't want to, like, it just doesn't have the mind share to justify a total rewrite in Clojure. Like, so much of programming comes down to more pragmatic considerations, like, can I find developers, to your point, to maintain stuff?
Yeah, and somebody here says that they're part of a business that failed largely because of functional programming. I'd love to see that example. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but it's like I don't know, having run businesses and been a part of businesses for a long time, I just, if you're going to blame functional programming for that, either your business model was so tightly coupled to your programming paradigm, or something happened, or maybe you're just crossing the streams and getting confused. I don't know. Anyway, if you got an example, show me.
I'd love to hear it. But I mean, I could see it, though. If you, as a programming shop, if, say, your IT org is so obsessed with functional programming that they're not actually getting their jobs done, then, yeah, in a sense, functional programming destroyed the company. It's not that functional programming per se was the problem, but like people's obsession with this kind of obscure idea overrode their just common sense of trying to get work done.
Yeah, I mean, business at the end of the day is like selling people what they want to buy, right? That's literally the essence of a business, and it's
Right.
Providing customer that value, and that's literally it. If we start overcomplicating it, I don't know what to tell you. So, maybe if it was like a service that somehow broke repeatedly because of the way it was programmed, I could see that maybe. But again, that the things that went into influencing the decision are more of what I'm interested in. Like how did you get so tightly coupled in the first place, right?
Yeah.
It's not like functional programming just sort of sprung up on its own, like out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm gonna ruin your business now."
Yeah.
It was a lot of decisions. Like you say, the decision to move from language X to language Y.
Yeah.
Right. Like what was that based on? Right. Was some sort of use case, or was this more like resume driven development at the end of the day? And I don't know. I mean, I got opinions on this. I've also run a business before, so I think I know what I'm talking about here. It's interesting. But again, I think as programmers too, and as technicians, we might tend to overweight our significance in the success or failure of a business. And so if you're a tech company, it might rightfully so be that you're important. If you're at a more mature company, I wager to guess that decisions made by executives might have a bit more influence. So
Well, and fundamentally, a lot of your contribution to the success of the company is getting your job done. That's important, but also just doing a good job of interfacing with the executives and actually finding
yeah.
out what needs to be done. And so, if I'm thinking about a company that failed due to functional programming, well, how did the CTO let that happen, or was there just no communication between the IT org and the CTO, people developing code? Like there was some kind of disconnect there. It wasn't just the programming team that screwed things up.
Yeah, and this person says here, yeah, Haskell doesn't allow much flexibility. I'm guessing that maybe
Yeah,
they're using Haskell, made
yeah,
for a
yeah.
very long development cycle. Scala is much better middle ground if you like a functional program. Yeah, I tend to
Right,
agree with that.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would have to understand like how Haskell even got into the mix in the first place, So, maybe there's a good reason for it, maybe it's not. But if it caused long development cycles, that to me that's a business decision at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The language being used is a consequence of that. But somehow somebody thought that'd be a great idea, and I don't know. So, but again, we're strongly opinionated people here, and usually talk out of our ass too. So there's that.
It's
So
that kind of week. It's that kind of week. It's just
it's
us.
that kind of week. It's been a kind of year, frankly. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like I see a lot of you have to get to the root cause of like what was the decision, right? So in my
Right.
case, it's always like I always ask 5 whys, or something like that. Just like why did you get into this situation, and keep asking that. So you'll dig into it. Sometimes it's a very intuitive answer. Sometimes it's very counterintuitive, right? But at the end of the day, it's like businesses, at least for now, until generative AI takes over, they're all run by people making decisions, and which is a fascinating thing to study in and of itself. If you look at organizational decision making, that's an interesting topic on its own. So
yeah, it's a vast topic for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway, I think we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. We've ranted enough for 1 week. Probably too much.
Managed to
for 1
offend the
week.
entire planet here.
Right.
Next we got let me check the calendar here. We got Malcolm Hawker. He's cool. He's going to be on the show. Then we got this following week some people from Cube. If you're in Salt Lake City next week, the big one's PyCon. So
Yeah.
that's gonna be dope to hang out there. Plus at Utah Data Engineering meetup next week on was it Wednesday over at Recursion, doing an in-person meetup. We're gonna be talking with Mother Duck, so that'll be cool. Talking about DuckDB and all that fun stuff. And then what else? This Thursday I'm doing an event. My friends at Matillion, they're actually starting a new podcast, so I'm going to be helping host that. So that's Thursday at 9:30 or 10 o'clock Mountain Time. So that's gonna be really cool. Talking with Mark Balcanetti, he's an OG in the space. I really like talking to him. That guy and I, we can talk for hours. So yeah, so that'll be dope. Other than that, pretty light week. So
pretty light week. Yeah. So we're all kind of hunkering down, getting ready for PyCon, I guess.
Yeah, PyCon. I'm recording a bunch of new shows for my podcast, the Joe Reis Show. So if you haven't checked that out, go check it out. It's on Spotify and other podcast platforms. It's audio only, so you're spared the troubles of having to stare at me on the screen. It's definitely a huge benefit. So I'm liking the audio only forecast format though. That's been a lot of fun
easier.
to do.
Yeah, and you can just focus on the audio production quality and not have to worry about video at all. Yeah.
Yeah, video is just a different world, right? But we've been doing videos. I mean, this is like I don't even know how many videos we've done. So
I mean, yeah, I'll have to check YouTube and see. We must be up to, what are we up to?
Hundreds.
Like a couple, hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah, plus being on other people's shows and all that stuff. So yeah, it's it's awesome. So anyway, and by the way, I'll give you a quick shout out to Matt and I are coming up with a data engineering workshop. So that'll be announced very soon. But if you want us to come into your company and teach you the art form of data engineering, who else to teach it, right?
Yeah.
Matt and me, we're the best in the biz. So
we'll have
there's other awesome people too. What's that?
Yeah. We'll have more to say about this at PyCon. That's the current.
We'll have more to say about it. Yeah, but just giving a sneak preview on that. Stay tuned. So anyway, awesome. So talk to you all later. Matt, see you around next week. And thanks to the audience out there. Great interface. Thanks for letting us rant. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.